So I'm Molly. I am the Chief Operating Officer of the ISA. And I'm happy to welcome Paul Shirley in tonight to talk to us about the process. Paul and ISA have been working together for a while now. He actually started a company, runs the writer's block, and he graciously invited our group in to do writer sprints every other week for some time. And now we're bringing him in to teach this class for everybody. Thank you, Paul, so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. Guys, how about a little in your head round of applause for Molly? I, as Molly mentioned, have gotten to know her over the last year or so and have been really amazed at how good she is at running things. And also, let's be honest, there's not a ton of super competent people in the world, and she's one of them. And that's just a joy to be around. Like, it's so much easier when people just like return emails on time and all of those things. And I've been just really happy to get to know her and to get to know the ISA a little bit. So that's that. Here's the plan. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about me. And then the most important thing is that I'm gonna get you talking to one another. I know a little bit about building processes when it comes to my basketball past and also writing and some other things, but I don't know everything. A lot of you know just as much as I do, and it's my hope that you'll be able to share some of that knowledge and some of the questions you have with each other. That's why the breakout rooms, which we'll get to here in a little bit. Before we do any of that, though, I want to do something that's a little bit silly, potentially, but what I'd love for you to do is just take a breath. Maybe sit up straight for a second and let go of whatever came before this, because it's going to take a little bit of cognitive effort for you to pay attention to what's happening on your screen and to talk to some strangers. Find a little presence here in what we're going to hopefully share together. And then next, I want to ask you to learn a little bit about the chat function, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. But here's my question for you. I want to know your second favorite movie ever. Terminator, says one person. Magnolia, some quick answers. Die Hard 2, which makes me think that maybe Die Hard 1 is that person's first. The Color Purple, which is a very serious choice. Rosemary's Baby. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I love that as a choice. The Princess Bride, that's my favorite movie. Usual Suspects, My Cousin Vinny. Flamingo Road. Jane Wants a Boyfriend. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Ooh, 2 for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. All right, that's great. We will get to a point later in this seminar when I tell you about a near-death injury that I went through. And because of that injury, I was on some serious painkillers when I saw Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which is kind of a confusing movie anyway, but when you're on Dilaudid is especially confusing, and I had to ask my mother what was happening about 72 times. So that movie is still one that I need to reinterpret. Okay, now, thank you for all of those answers. I appreciate a little participation. We'll get back to some participation shortly. Right now, I want to share with you something that you can look at. As you may have divined from signing up for this seminar, I used to play professional basketball. I did that for 9 years. I don't want to belabor that point and tell you a bunch of basketball stories, but it is kind of germane because it's going to get us to this idea of a process. When I talk about process, what I'm talking about is the habits and routines that we build so that we can access deep, concentrated work. That is particularly applicable for writing, as I know and as you know, because writing is the job of building routines, building habits. No matter what people tell you, it's about doing it as many times a week as you can, not about the romantic view that we all have of going off to a cabin in the woods someday and writing an entire screenplay in a weekend. It's almost always about building a process. So let me tell you briefly about how I came to this realization. As you may have seen from those photos, I played for 9 years as a professional basketball player. I started my college career at Iowa State, and then I went off to Greece. I played in Russia and for 3 teams in Spain. I played briefly in the NBA for the Chicago Bulls, the Phoenix Suns, the Atlanta Hawks. And I want to pinpoint that time with the Chicago Bulls because I think it's fairly important. Previous to that, I had really just taken whatever jobs would come up. And this was true of most of my professional basketball career. You don't get to pick where you go. Most of the time, the teams tell you where they want you. So I had played at that point. I had gone to summer league with the Cleveland Cavaliers. I had gone to training camp with the Los Angeles Lakers. I mentioned I went to Greece for 9 months. I then went the next year to training camp with the Atlanta Hawks. After I was cut there, I went to play in the CBA in Yakima, Washington, where I lived in a motel and drove a Chevy Malibu that I had purchased for $50. And then I got called back up to the Atlanta Hawks and played my first ever NBA basketball game. I shot 4 times and I missed all of my shots. And after my 10 days were up, I went back to another sort of decent job playing in Spain. And then the next year, it was the same sort of thing. I went to training camp with the then New Orleans Hornets. And then I played in the minor leagues for the Kansas City Knights. And then I got called up by the Chicago Bulls. And this all happened in 3 years. It was very speedy. Now, as a basketball player, if you saw that little presentation that I worked up, you might have seen a picture of me playing as a kid. And what I loved about playing basketball from childhood through high school was that feeling of being on my own, out in the backyard or in a gym, just shooting, just finding this rhythm that I had found, and finding this sense of peace. And what I was finding was, as you can guess, a flow state. I was doing something that was both challenging and also within my grasp, which is sort of the definition of a flow state. It's something that's hard for us, but also something we have some capacity for. Now, I had done a zillion things at that time. I was also way into spelling bees. I was in Boy Scouts. I was in 4-H. I also played baseball. I was a big reader. There were a zillion other things, but there was something about basketball that sort of captured my brain. And that was why I played basketball. We will come back later in this seminar to this question of why. So put a pin in your head. Through high school, I got to be pretty good. I went off to Iowa State, as I said. But somewhere in here, my why got a little bit perverted. It became more about, mostly, a fear of failure. What had happened was that I had screwed up what I loved about sports. Now, it took a realization for that to happen. That realization came when I was playing for the Chicago Bulls, as I mentioned. The Bulls were really bad and struggling quite a bit. And so therefore I got to play a lot. Here's the setting. We're playing at the Indiana Pacers. I'm playing a ton. In fact, I played what is now, I think, still my career high in minutes at 27 minutes. And I saw an opportunity. I was on a 10-day contract at the time to get across the lane and take a charge. So a charge is when you get in front of somebody who's coming at the basket, you let them hit your body and you fall to the ground. It's a play that coaches love. It's the sort of play that gets you a longer contract. So I roll across the lane and I get hit by this guy named Austin Crozier. And when this happens, it ruptures my kidney and my spleen. But I did not know that. What I knew was that something was wrong and that guys on 10-day contracts don't get to worry about whether they're hurt or not. So I rolled off to the side and wondered what was going on. And then we went to the hospital and there was a lot of caterwauling on the airplane back to Chicago. I thought maybe I would die, mostly because the trainer, I could see in his eyes that it looked like I might die. And when we got back to Chicago, I spent 9 days in the hospital. And I would like to say that that's when I realized that I had screwed things up. But the reality was very different. It took me another year of playing basketball and meeting some people who retaught me that what I had loved about basketball was not playing in front of the fans or this idea of getting another contract. It was that simple act that I talked about, going out and practicing. And that led to getting to play in games. But that I had messed this up somewhere along the way. So now let's fast forward again. After that stint with the Bulls and recovering from this catastrophic injury, go to play for the Phoenix Suns. This is the Phoenix Suns of Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, a very good Phoenix Suns team for those who are not necessarily all that into NBA basketball. It was a team that was 62-20, and I got to play on that team. And while playing on that team, I was asked to write a blog, which at the time was kind of a newfangled thing. I should mention that throughout my basketball career, I had noticed that it was very strange. So I wrote about what was happening in that career. That started when I went off to Greece. I wrote this weekly journal that I would send as an email to people. I would kind of, over time, I had built up this shtick a little bit where I realized that if I was funny in these emails, people would respond to me and I would be a little bit less lonely. So when the Phoenix Suns asked me to write this blog, I kind of knew like, oh yeah, this might be a thing that leads to something. And sure enough, that led to a book deal. That's the book that was the last picture in that presentation I shared. And so I motored along after this book came out and after my time with the Phoenix Suns, and kept playing basketball until I was 32 or 33. And I was safe in this knowledge that when my basketball career ended, I had career number 2 already lined up. I would be a writer, right? It makes sense. I had written one book that had come out to some acclaim, and then I would write more books. So I moved to Los Angeles and I started writing, worked on a novel, and thought it got to be pretty good. I sent that novel off to an agent, and this is where the writers are paying attention because they know how this goes. And that agent took it out to 12 publishers. They all said no, but I would not be daunted. I decided I would self-publish this book. And so I sent it off to a friend of mine and told her to edit it and that we would put it out in that way. And I can still remember that I was in a coffee shop on Venice Boulevard when I got her return email. She said, "Paul, I'm sorry, but this just isn't good enough. It's neither a memoir nor a novel, and you should consider letting it go." If you saw that little presentation I did of my basketball past, you might have also seen a picture of me crying, which is a whole story in and of itself. And I hope that leads you to believe that I am the truth, which is that I'm an easy crier. And I certainly broke down into tears in that Venice coffee shop because I had put so much time and energy into this book. I'd also put so much time and energy into this idea that I would be a writer. This would be my thing. So what came next was, I'm not a screenwriter, but you guys will recognize this term. What came next was my dark night of the soul. That is, of course, when the hero has to decide what comes next. And what came out of my dark night of the soul was actually more of a Homer Simpson dough moment, where I realized, like, I knew how to do this writing thing. It's just that I hadn't been doing it all along. The answer was that I had to build a system. I had to figure out a way to write as many days a week as I could, just like I had done with basketball. And that I was bullshitting myself by thinking that I could write for 6 hours once a week and kind of catch back up with it or whatever the situation allowed. And that's what led to this idea of a process of figuring out how to train myself in the same way that I had done as a basketball player to access these deep work sessions, these sessions of where I'm in a flow state, or what people might call the zone. So that is what has led me now to getting to talk to you about this idea of building a writing practice or building a writing routine. And that's what we're going to talk about today. To start that, I am, as I mentioned, going to send you into some breakout rooms. We probably got from Molly some questions before we actually even started all of this. And then when we come back, we're going to come back to this large group and talk about what came up. Specifically, we're going to get into this question of, when are you going to do all this stuff? When are you going to actually make these changes to the way that you write? I want to know if anybody's brave enough to tell me how they're going to make an improvement to this writing plan, this writing routine of theirs. Most importantly, when are you going to do that? Chuck, we're coming to you.
unmute.
Chuck Eiler.
Um, I tend to write out of a nagging sense of guilt and
Love
not
that.
not have a set time. I have a writing group and I have to deliver 6 pages by 3 o'clock on Friday. So I have this sense through the week that's like I have ideas. That's good. I have ideas for this week, and then it's like I need to get them down and I need to get them polished and I need to get them focused. But I don't have a set time when I write, and I'm thinking that just saying, hey, 10 o'clock to um, 11:30 or 12 o'clock, I will write every day and sit there and focus and
Mhm.
stuff and get it done. So
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so much value in A, like you said, having a writing group that depends on you to get something accomplished. And then B, this next step of deciding that you're going to do it every day at the same time is really valuable. I was able to pop into a couple of breakout rooms, and by the way, I have to say that like it's so nice to be able to get to see some of you, because I think that gives us a little more context for the sorts of struggles that we're all going through. I'm going to use one example, and forgive me because I've forgotten exactly which group I was in, but one gentleman was talking about needing to, he's a school bus driver, which is among the most laudable jobs there are. I can't imagine making yourself miserable like that every day, but kudos to him. So he was talking about needing to have an alarm, or he has an alarm because he's got to go do the afternoon school bus run, right? And that sometimes I think what we run into is this sense that, God, if I just had a little more time, then I would be able to write the masterwork of my life. But what turns out to often be true is that knowing we have that ending point actually facilitates this engagement with flow or a deep work state more readily. So I hear this from writers all the time. I've been around writers a bunch in the last 5 years running writer's block. um, I think a lot of people often think that they need more time. And in reality, it's more about concentrated time, distraction free time. And in a lot of cases, that might only be 20 minutes. It may be the alarm's going to go off because I got to go run the school route. And so, therefore, I know I only have 20 minutes. I will tell you a very brief story about how when I was in college, my degree is actually in mechanical engineering, of all things. And my first week of school, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to be able to pull off this idea of doing both engineering and basketball. What I found was I would go to my engineering classmates' rooms and they'd have the entire afternoon to study. And I'd be like, God, I wish I had that much time. But most of them failed out. And it wasn't because I'm super smart. I'm not even that good as an engineer. You should not hire me as an engineer. But I was really focused by the fact that I had to go to basketball practice. I knew that if I had 20 minutes to study, that might be my only 20 minutes to study that day. And I have found that to be so true with writing, that for me, it's 1 hour, 6 days a week, but it's only an hour. It's saying, I'm going to make this deal with myself of all I have to do is write for an hour. And then when that time is up, I stop. I was in another group and we were talking about the way we make deals with our brains, right? So if you say all you have to do is write for an hour, but then you write for 2 hours, then the next day your brain's gonna be like, what the hell, man? You said it was only gonna be an hour, and now we're sitting here for 2 hours, so I'm not gonna write at all this next day. So I think there's a lot of value in those really just routine and what seem, I mean, honestly, it seems kind of mundane to say I only have this time to write. We all have this vision, this romantic vision of being in this state of flow forever, but unfortunately it's just not possible. I wonder if somebody else has the guts to I'm seeing some stuff in here too. Marley mentions that she has a problem stopping. Liz says 3 to 4 hours 3 times a week, minimum 10 pages per week. Candy mentions write first as my first obligation. I like that. Um, in one group, Stephanie mentioned that she talked about J.K. Rowling and her writing while her baby was napping in the coffee shop. And yeah, I think those things are really valuable. This idea that it doesn't have to be magic. It can be just this setting up of things. One thing that comes to mind that I know people run into often, and I want to wrap this up, and then we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit. I think what happens is that it feels really good to be in the zone or in a flow state, and we want to keep doing it. And that makes a lot of sense. I think that one thing I was reading about this week is that really made sense to me, because I've been thinking about how to express this idea, right? How to express this idea of building a process. It's kind of like this fight between order and chaos, right? So chaos gets a bad rap because chaos sounds like a hurricane, but chaos is also like possibility and potential and creativity and the things that can come from just like letting our mind bloom and flow. The problem is we can't stay in a chaos mode all the time. So we have to use order to set up little bouts where we allow ourselves to access this kind of chaos mode, or this idea of potential or progress or possibility. And I think it's sort of metering that out through the week or through the month or even through the day, knowing that we only have the resources to access to go into that kind of chaotic mode every so often. Unfortunately, we just can't, we don't have the brain power to stay in there for 8 hours. And most of us have a bunch of other things to do. And in reality, those other things to do allow us to set up these backstops so that we can access this state of possibility or potential just every once in a while. So now I mentioned that we're going to shift gears. That is because I think that there's a lot of value in talking about this idea of like the actual mechanics of when you write, but that we also have to connect to the why, the purpose. And when I talk about purpose, I don't necessarily mean I'm going to save the world through my writing. I mentioned early in this that my purpose with basketball, because basketball is pretty pointless, let's be honest, like it's just 10 guys trying to either put a basketball in a hoop or keep the other guys from putting the basketball in the hoop. But what I found was that I felt better because I was playing basketball. And I think that's a really great purpose with writing. It's not necessarily that you're going to write a 10-season show that's on HBO. It's that you feel good when you're doing it. Now, along the way, I think it's also helpful to connect to a deeper purpose, like maybe that you want to help someone, that you want to share what you're saying. But along these lines, I want to talk about this idea of purpose. And that's what we're going to get into in this next little bit. The reason for this thought of the why is that it's my belief that you have to figure out that why so that then you can go back and set up the structure, right? So we want to know that we care about the feeling that we allow or that we find each day. And in order to attach to that feeling, we have to connect to these little buttons of I'm only going to work for 10 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever it might be. And this, by the way, is pretty universal. It isn't just writing. It could be I need to work on my emails for 20 minutes and I'm going to find a flow state even in that. But in order to get to that, in order to remain kind of in love with this process, I think we first have to talk about this why. So that is what we're going to get into in this second breakout room. So now we want to, what I think we're learning about this seminar as a whole is that the best thing we can do is, it's going to sound hokey when I say it, but the best thing we can do is to hear one another, right? So I noticed in a bunch of rooms that people are feeling really guilty about not writing enough. I was in one room and we were talking about the power that should statements have over us. So feeling like we should be writing more, and how brutal that is for our brains. I want to find, there's a person named Kathy with a C. You were gutsy enough to say that you would be willing to talk about what you would like to do to sort of make this 10% improvement in your connection between your why and what you're doing day to day. So what does that look like for you? And first of all, I guess it'd be helpful maybe for people to know, what are you working on?
So I have about 5 scripts that I've written. They are still being polished. And so I'm trying to focus on that. So I'm a screenwriter. I've published in the past, but it was a book on trauma. So that's kind of my work related, not related to writing, not creative. So anyway, that's kind of my passion is screenwriting. And that's where I'd eventually like to be is, a paid screenwriter. So what was your, I'm sorry, what was your first question?
So in this idea of like, in this next month, so it's March 3rd, right? So we've got March ahead of us. How could you do the job of connecting your day to day? So kind of the assembly line of like, okay, I got to answer these emails and I got to write these words and all that, to your why, to the why of what you want to accomplish. What could help that move along for you?
So it's bringing it back to why, which for my why, it was being able to see more people, with my background represented on the screen. That would be wonderful. And I have to give a shout out to my group just now, because we came up with a lot of ideas together, because some of them we're doing and some of them we gave each other the idea. But one was just to do a little something every day, because that really puts that motivation in. It keeps you going. It keeps you on track. So we were talking about this little group here, and how just talking to each other for a few minutes has really lifted our spirits and kind of put us back into that writing mode and get us motivated. So that was one of the things that we talked about. We have a few more. I don't know if you want me to keep going or not.
Well, do those apply to you specifically?
This one does apply to me. What I was telling them was that prior to the pandemic, I had started a writing group here locally. And so we would meet once a week and we would share pages and we would talk about films. And that was really great for me because it kept me on track. I had someone who was going to read my work. And so I was kind of keeping myself accountable, and I lost that. It's really hard to kind of do that through Zoom. But I think that was just an excuse, meeting up here and talking to the folks a little while ago, really kind of showed me that I can do this online. I'm just not doing it online. So for me, starting back up that group would be really wonderful.
Yeah, I think there's so much value in that positive peer pressure, right? Of knowing that somebody else is counting on you. And I think that in the times we're living in becomes all the more important because we don't have the normal interactions. I know that when I reconnected to knowing that I needed to have a process to my writing, it was as simple as I had a friend who lived in London at the time, and this friend wanted to get up every day at 5 a.m. That was his job for himself. And I wanted to write, I had decided I was going to write 1,500 words every day before I had breakfast. So when I finished my 1,500 words, I would then turn on my phone and send him a WhatsApp message with the word count. And by then he would have taken a picture of the clock on his wall to prove that he had woken up by 5 o'clock. And so that was enough, knowing that he was counting on me to send him a word count. And I knew that he was going to send me a picture of the clock on his wall. That was enough to get me through. And I think people often would be surprised at how it doesn't take that much. It's often just one other person. So if you can find one other person who is relying on you in a way to check in or to say that you wrote what you were going to say, that's often enough. And that's a way to sort of like get yourself to that why day after day, because I don't want to lose sight of, it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to fix everything in the world. It could just be, I love the feeling. I love being connected to my work day in and day out, and accessing that flow state day after day after day is enough. The question is, how can you build in that routine or that process, if you'll let me steal from myself, so that you can get to that. And that's where these things like accountability buddies come in. That's where maybe clearing out like whatever your expectations were for March, of saying like, you know what, I'm going to finish this screenplay by March 31st. Let's get rid of that idea of like the finishing, and instead just say, I'm going to write for 40 minutes a day, 5 days a week for the rest of March. And let's see where I am. Let's see if I've fallen back in love with just the act of the doing, and I'm less worried about just this idea of a finish line that's probably going to betray us anyway. Does that make sense, Kathy?
It does. And usually when the writing process starts for me, it doesn't take long for me to start falling in love and going, oh my God, why did I stop this for so long? And it is motivating, and it's just finding that outer motivation for me, and not getting too distracted. So lots of great ideas today. Like I said, in the group, the webinars, the meetups, all of these have been really great ideas.
Cool. Well, thank you for coming up on the stage, Kathy. What I would love is there is there a specific question you have that I could help with, that maybe we could help with as a group? Okay, so you had a question, it sped past it, but I liked it. What was your question?
Yeah, like how do you know when your script is done? Like you're done with all the drafts. I'm curious
Okay.
about your thoughts.
Okay, tell me just briefly, how long have you been working on this?
I'm asking more for the future. I'm still in my first draft. Let's put it that way.
Okay, you're in a first draft. How long have you been working on this draft?
I got started writing in August, and I spent like 3 months just outlining the story. It's for a limited series, and I'm trying to work on the whole story. And so now I kind of have the first 2 episodes in mind. So now I'm trying to work on the pilot.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. I would say that this is the harsh truth about knowing when something's done. Oh, there's another child. First of all, can we just like take a moment that Emily's trying to write a screenplay and raise 2 children as well? Emily, one thing I will say, and this, I think it's also going to sound a little floofy, but bear with me. So when we talk about this idea of the whys, we talk about deep work and flow. A lot of that is this idea of like, it feels good. And it's going to sound annoying, but you're going to know when it's done, because you're going to give it to somebody and they're going to say, this has to go on the screen. You're going to also know when you give it to somebody and they're like, that's pretty good, right? Like we've all been through that, where they don't really love it and they're basically just trying to like make you feel okay. Again, this is a little bit hokey, but so much of this is about trusting your feelings. You know when something's good, you know when it feels good to write, you know when it feels like you have a purpose or a why. And it's the same answer for knowing when you're done, that you will be able to feel it. It won't be because somebody else says something. It'll be because you get a feeling when they say that thing, and that will feel okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Okay, I have one more idea for you. Are you up for it?
totally. And he's got milk, so we're good now.
Okay. Start writing another thing. Because what happens, and I've seen this so much as in running writers groups, oftentimes people get so wrapped up in this one thing they're working on. And the reality is you cannot control if that one thing is going to resonate with people. All you can control is, in your case, like maybe it's writing for 30 minutes, 4 days a week, because I can see that there's a bit of madness if this is any indication of your life. So maybe it's just writing 3 times a week or 4 times a week for 30 minutes, but allowing yourself to play in a second thing so that you don't put so much pressure on the first thing. And that will probably actually let that first thing breathe and feel a little bit better. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay. Christopher, are you available?
I am available, yes.
Great. So tell me a little bit about your life schedule. What's your day job?
I'm a marketing director.
Okay. So marketing director is a 9 to 5 kind of thing?
More than that, more like 8 to 6, 8 to 7.
8 to 6. Okay. So your concern would be like, how do you actually fit in time to write and also like sleep and eat and those kinds of things?
Yeah, and raise a 15-month-old.
Oh, you also have a child.
Yeah.
You guys are heroes compared to me. I'm over here like, well, you should just.
Well, I only have one. Emily had like.
Well, still, that's a lot. So tell me briefly, like, when does writing feel its best to you? Not during the day, but like, tell me about the feeling you have when it's going well.
When it's going well, right now my writing is more in short form. It's with sketch comedy, comedy writing.
Cool.
So when I laugh and when I get that warm feeling inside, it feels good, and that's when I'm in my happy place.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, yeah. So when you make yourself laugh, that feels great, right?
Yeah.
And now, so how long are you writing in bouts right now, in bursts?
In bursts, I do most of my writing during the weekend.
Okay.
You know, that's really where I have most free time. But I would say it varies between morning and night. You know, like,
Okay.
and I find that nowadays, night or nowadays actually morning is suiting me better. I'm like your friend where I try to wake up at 5 every morning. But then it's, I find that that's not doable a lot of times. That either
That
Either
makes
your
sense.
body starts crashing and you
Yeah.
just give up on yourself, or something comes up like you have to stay later or do something later, and waking up early is not feasible.
Okay, so I have an idea for you. And
Yeah.
that is this. You have a 15-month-old, right? And that's a
Yeah.
big deal in your life right now. So
Yes.
I think it's really about taking the pressure off of yourself through some rules that are hard and fast.
Okay.
So what if, just as an example, you said, I'm going to write for 90 minutes on Saturday and Sunday, and on Wednesdays, I'm going to write for 15 minutes, but that's it. And that becomes your schedule for the next, I don't know, 6 months until you get through what is clearly going to be a stressful time because of this young child, and also because there's a pandemic on and all of these other things.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound like it might be doable?
For sure. Yeah.
I think that if you were to able to build in that kind of rule, what you get maybe is that you bridge the gap between the weekends, because it is a long time to go. If you go 5 days between writing sessions, a lot of times it gets a little fuzzy, like where was I, all of that.
Right.
And you can be aware that the time you're living in now is not how life will be always. So there might come a time when you're able to crank that to 4 sessions a week. And I hope that whomever is still listening is seeing a little bit of you in themselves, right? That it might be that life is just too stressful for you to have that perfect writing schedule that you've always dreamed of. But that doesn't mean you don't have to have, or you can't have some kind of writing schedule. So what I would also push you to do is on that Wednesday, if there's a way for you to treat yourself in some way so that like that becomes something you look forward to. As I've said, I live in LA, and there were times that I used to go to this coffee shop that was open all night long, late at night, just because it was a treat, because there were weirdos there, and it meant that I was a little off my usual schedule, right? So I would go at like 10:15 or 10:30. And that became like a little bit of a treat. I would often go to this Whole Foods that was near there, and I would buy a beer and drink it in the parking lot like a hoodlum. But that was part of the ritual, right? Was like this fun of like, this feels like I'm doing something that's a little bit different. It's just a little like rebellious in its way. And that allowed me to then connect to doing that each time that I did it. And so I wonder if there's a way for you to think about like, okay, weekends, you can probably carve out the 90 minutes, or maybe it's 45 minutes, whatever the number is. But how do you do it on that Wednesday? Is it, I have to go to bed early on Tuesday night, I'm going to reward myself with a scotch because it's Wednesday afternoon, whatever the thing is, like what comes to mind for you? What's the reward that you could put into place?
Well, it is funny. I did have a scotch last night, so I cracked that bottle open last night, but I can't do that every week. I'm a big movie guy, so just watching, and I find that now in my life I watch movies episodically, just like bits and pieces every day. So just I find that reward, like that little piece of time.
Okay. So maybe so you're saying that it could be that it's, if I write my 15 or 20 minutes on Wednesday, whatever you decide, then I can watch a bit of a movie.
Yeah.
That's great. And I what I would encourage everyone is to think in terms of something so simple like that. That's just like, how do you build in this kind of Pavlovian response in your brain of like, when I write, I do this. Now, at a certain point, like we've talked about, the love of it, the love of being in that flow state takes back over. It's just a matter of like building in this interruption to things where you can decide, I'm going to set this schedule. I'm going to get through this tough bit, where the tough bit just might be like restarting. The tough bit might be you raising a 15-month-old, or Emily having to fight with these 2 kids that are taking over her kitchen. But getting through that difficult time such that you can bridge the gap to a time when things are a little easier. Cool? Mm-hmm. So cool. Christopher, last thing, I want you to commit this to the group, because that'll help too. That's the other thing. So
I'm committing this to the group.
So what are you committing to the group?
I am committing that I'm going to pay 15 minutes on Wednesdays, a part of my weekend schedule as well.
Okay.
I will reward myself in doing so.
Great. Cool, man. Thank you. I love it. All right.
Thank you.
So guys, we're going to wrap up here in a second, but I would love for you to just kind of to think about these ideas of rewarding yourself, of getting rid of some of that guilt, And using this month, so March is upon us, right? And there are whatever we have, 28 days left in March. Use this as an experiment. You don't have to do whatever we're going to talk about forever. It could just be that you do this until the end of March and you say, that Paul Shirley was full of shit. This didn't work for me at all. But what really do you have to lose? I think that it's worth coming up with some kind of schedule so that you can build a process, so you can fall back in love with it. And let's see what happens. Cool. So I'm going to post a link. I'm posting it now to this thing I run called The Process. It's the website is createyourprocess.com. Go there. There's a little quiz that talks about how we might be able to help you build a process. And once you're through the quiz, we'll be in touch. And I'd love to see you. We host virtual co-working sessions, which last an hour. Lots of writers in there. Those happen from 8 a.m. Pacific time all the way to 6 p.m. Pacific time. We do roundtables, which are much like these, where we do some breakout rooms talking about how to set up your week, how to connect mind and body, how to think about the big picture. Those happen 4 times a week. It's a whole thing. We'll talk more about that. Most importantly, I really appreciate getting the chance to talk to you, and I hope to see you guys again soon.